Marina was finishing her monthly inventory of dishes. A bunch of glasses were broken again. What can you do? It's not a fancy place. People come and go, and not always neat. She, of course, at first, she thought she'd get a tip as a waitress. Well, what kind of tips? I wish she hadn't put her own in. How's she going to live when the baby comes? This is not how she and Pablo imagined their life. Not at all. At the thought of her husband's eyes, she again felt the sting of tears. How everything coincided, the gas leak at the gas station, the smoldering cigarette thrown by someone, and Pablo, who was always in a hurry to serve a customer and ended up at the site of the explosion. The fact that her husband was gone was stubbornly unbelievable. Such thorough and sedate guys were always rare, and he had distinguished himself at school. Homemade, handy, and maturely sensible. She liked him even in the 6th grade when she, the new girl, sat with him at the same desk. But the reasons were different then. Pablo was probably the only one who didn't try to yank the new girl by the thick flaxen braid she wore instead of the traditional girl's ponytail. From then on, they became friends, and then they never imagined it could be any other way. How happy they were to fix up their house. Now, Violeta lives there with Diego because Pablo was lucky enough to borrow money from his sister's husband to renovate the house. Diego is good, of course, did not lose heart after Pablo's death. There's a receipt, no money. You don't want to go to court, then vacate the premises. And Violeta didn't particularly intercede, even though she was his sister. But it's not surprising. She was used to it since childhood that she needed as much as possible, and her older sister, the minimum. Reasons for this attitude of parents Marina never understood. It would seem that both were native daughters, both learned well, both helped at home, but Violeta was for some reason the favorite, and she, Marina, like Cinderella. You can look out the window at the ball when you've done all the work. How can you divide children into favorites and dislikes when even a cat licks all its kittens the same way? The question is rhetorical, and there's no one to ask it. The father is already dead, and mom is very sick and doesn't want to see anyone. Marina's unhappy thoughts were transported back to her early childhood. Here's her birthday, and in her purse is a coveted puffball with clothes, which can be changed, bathed in a toy bath, and put on a tiny chair. But Violeta's birthday is just 2 months away, and on her bed sits an amazing doll. Well, absolutely like a real girl from the century before last. Long hair, velour bonnet on her head, a plaid woolen pelerina, and little leather shoes. It seemed to Marina at the time that Marie was from her favorite fairy tale about the Nutcracker came to their house. So realistic and beautiful was the toy. It was scary to even touch it, not to mention asking Violeta to play with it. And here was Violeta's briefcase, in which mom was always trying to shove an extra orange or tangerine. And Violeta never wore out her clothes. But Marina wore everything after cousins and sisters, and even just the children of their acquaintances. Why so? Yes, parents did not luxuriate, but they were not poor. They had their place in the clothing market. They didn't complain about their lives. Perhaps the only person who really loved her in this life was Pablo. If he were alive, they would have paid Diego's debt and waited for a child Marina not in a rented shabby apartment, but in their house with Pablo. And no one would not dare even look in her direction. Her husband has always been able to make respect for himself and his beloved woman. All right, now while the term is small, you can get by. And then what? About then she did not want to think, and Marina sighed, put neatly the remaining glasses on the shelf, and got ready to go home. On the way, it will be necessary to stop by her mother's house to pick up some groceries. She hasn't left the house for 3 days already. Her mother, as usual, was not in the mood. After a glance at the groceries, she went to watch her favorite TV series. Marina, accustomed to not reacting to unfriendly meetings, began to boil soup with meatballs, which in their family has always been their favorite dish. When it was time to throw the meatballs and fried meat into the boiling water, the show was over and Mom appeared in the kitchen, clearly expecting a bowl of hot, flavorful soup. "Wait, Mom, a little more and the soup will be ready. Sit down for now." Marina turned to her, not taking her eyes off the stove. "How are you feeling today?" "Compared to your father, well," the woman joked grimly and sat down on a stool. "For meatballs, fresh pork took?" "Of course, fresh homemade, just like you taught me." smiled her daughter. It's good. The only joy left in my old age is to eat a bowl of rich soup.
Ma, what old age? You're still very old. Well, my health is failing, yes, but that's okay. You'll get better.
I'll heal. Yes. If I don't follow your father, I won't follow. Mom, what are you doing? First of all, what's with the gloomy mood? And secondly, did Grandpa die? Well, how could he live? He's already in his 9th decade. He's outlived his son. They say God gave him an easy death. A few weeds in the garden and sat down to catch his breath, and he was gone in no time. It's been almost a month now. And you don't say anything? Where did they bury him? Why without us? Don't yell at your mother. She's so quick. Why without us? So he lived perfectly well without us. So what's he need us for if he's dead? To pay for the funeral? You should have given your son money for a car. To give his son money for a car at the time, and then we could have buried him. Mom, do you hear yourself? Marina was absent-mindedly crumpling her apron in her hands. When was that? Is it possible that because of some money and not even go to the funeral? You could have at least told me since you're sick yourself. Grandfather is not a homeless man to die like that, to be buried by strangers. And you're a rich woman, so you're rich? You wear your mother's modestly, even though I raised you, and you're so fond of your grandfather, whom you haven't seen since you were a little girl, that you're going to feed the whole village at the wake? How many times do I have to tell you? Your father and I needed a new car to transport goods, to feed, clothe, and shoe you and Irishka, and he, an old geezer, wanted a new cowshed, as if the cattle didn't give milk in that one. I had to borrow money from Stepan to borrow at interest. That's the interest on which you didn't eat enough, and you didn't get new toys. So this means that I paid Uncle Stepan all the interest, said Marina slowly. What are you talking about, that you paid? Did not understand her mother. Well, of course. Underfunded toys, things, treats. Violetta always had plenty of it. Expensive toys, new clothes, and treats in her briefcase. And I have clothes off someone else's shoulder. Cheaper toys, and in my briefcase, 1 apple. Mom, maybe I was not your father and you were not related? Finally managed to talk Marina on a long-standing tormented her topic. You think I never noticed that you have always loved Violetta more than me? Mother flared up, but did not give up. And why are you complaining about life? Yes, Violetta, maybe, and more attention was, she is smaller. Pregnancy, I suffered severely. In labor, almost died. I almost died in childbirth. Obviously, a weak child requires more parental care, so there was nothing you weren't offended, and don't make things up. Is she also living in my house out of childish weakness? Lives in my house too? Marina has already burst, and the accumulated resentment inevitably overcame the barrier of daughterly restraint. I would have brought you better food, by the way, if I hadn't spent so much money on a rented apartment. You shouldn't have gotten into debt, said the mother. Don't you have a place to live now? No place to live, the daughter said sadly. For the rent of the apartment ends in 2 weeks, and there's nothing else to pay without Pablo. And grandfather gave his house to whom? He didn't give anything to anyone. He was going to live to be 100 years old. He didn't complain about anything. The house is still standing. What's it to you? Mom, maybe I'll at least take my grandfather's house since Violetta and Diego are living in mine? Deal with Violetta yourself, muttered her mother and shuffled into the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Suddenly, the thought that struck Marina now did not give her peace. At the cafe, she was already a candidate for departure. When hiring, they immediately warned that maternity leave is not provided. A little more time, and the pregnancy would become visible. So goodbye, job. To bow my head, there'll be nowhere to bend your head but Grandpa's house. It is urgent to take the paycheck and go to the village before Violetta and Diego get there. Yes, the house is nobody's now, and she can't get the documents for it yet, but throwing a living person out on the street or just putting her own lock on the door is not the same thing. She can't pack a second time on her own. That's enough. It's time to start a new life and go out on her own. At the cafe, when they found out why she'd been fired, instantly, and a day later, loaded with suitcases and bags, Marina stood at the door of a good quality rural dwelling with closed shutters. Well, hello, home, dear home, she said. Will you accept me as your new mistress? And meeting no objection, opened the creaking wooden door with her key, and so began a new and not at all smooth chapter of her life. The villagers, who hadn't waited for their relatives to come to her grandfather's funeral, kept aloof and unfriendly, rightly believing that it was necessary to come here to bury the master. The garden was half overgrown, and even the half-planted yielded very scanty fruit. There were no animals in the farm, and there was no work in the village, by definition. Marina was already panicked, anticipating a hungry existence, but suddenly, on the rescue came neighbor Natalia, who, unlike the other villagers, sympathized with the hard-working and modest girl. "You dear won't last long here like that," she once said to Marina, seeing the girl picking the ground with a shovel in search of unexcavated potatoes. "Let's help each other out. I've got a big farm, and a cow, and chickens, and geese, and there's even a boar. I don't manage as well as I did when I was young. My Ladushka milks well. I have to use the surplus somewhere, and I can't stand on the highway in the afternoon. Then to give it to wholesalers for a penny, I'd rather ask you to trade. It'll be good for you and me. Well, do you agree?" "Of course," Marina agreed. It was finally sent by the grace of fate, allowing to somehow survive in her situation. So, without delay, the next day she stood on the highway with cans of milk, a bucket of sour cream, and appetizing white curd balls, keeping on their surface the fresh imprint of a gauze mesh of gauze. Next to her was freckled Carla with a mountain of fried and baked pies, and Grandpa Nicandro with a noble catch of redfish and striped perch. "Look at that, Grandpa Nicandro. Natalia has now got a personal realizer," winked Carla. "No way in the farmers with hired labor."
"Don't talk magpie," waved away the grandfather. "You look at your own goods, and you shouldn't lay your hands on other people's." "Oh, look at the strictness," snorted Carla, and switched to Marina. "What, the need to nibble? I thought Grandpa's inheritance will be richer."
"I did not think anything," simply replied Marina. "There was nowhere to live, so I came here." "There aren't enough men in town to take in a pretty girl?"
"My man died, and the house was repossessed. Do you understand?" Carla faltered and stared angrily at the moving cars, and Grandpa Nicandro quacked and shook his head contritely.
By noon, Marina had only half a liter of milk left with an empty pail, and she was going to go home. Carla, who had been proudly silent all this time, suddenly rolled up the 3 remaining pies with jam and shoved them into Marina's hand. "Here, with milk to drink," said Carla jerkily, and immediately turned away. Something subtly reminded Marina of a little bandit from the Snow Queen. "One pie will not be fed up," reasonably Grandpa Nicandro said. And now to the pies joined a trio of pies shuddering tales of handsome carp. Marina could hardly hold back the tears, thanked the villagers, and hurried home so as not to cry in front of them in her voice. From that moment, her relations with the villagers began to warm, and life slowly began to get better. The only thing that was seriously worrying was the gestational age, growing in direct proportion to the approaching winter. How would she stand in the winter of her last months on the highway, and what she would do then, Marina did not imagine, but she filled herself with hope that, as in the case of her grandfather's house, life would give her a way out of the situation. In the evenings, she quietly prayed in front of her grandfather's old icons. One day Marina saw among the rushing cars on the highway familiar red Volkswagen Diego's car and inwardly shuddered, secretly hoping that her modest figure would remain unrecognized. But it was not to be. The car braked sharply, the front door opened, and Violeta came out, looking at her sister like a ghost. "So there she is, our missing one," she stretched out, staring intently at Marina. No way, a countrywoman." Marina shamefully lowered her eyes and, sitting next to Carla opposite, stared angrily at Violeta. Without noticing it, Violeta continued, "You, I see, not badly settled here. Milk, sour cream, and cottage cheese. But who will pay the debts? Oh, and I'm entitled to half of Grandpa's house, too, and legally." "You've already taken away my house," said quietly Marina. "What else do you want?" Violeta did not have time to reply. Never characterized by patience and delicacy, Carla suddenly straightened up sharply, chin up and badly squinted, blurted out, "Hey you rude intellectual, what are you doing here? Standing here? You're blocking our goods. Go away in your Tarante where you were going and don't interfere with honest people's bread. Did you need Andrzejic's house? Where were you when we were burying him like a homeless bum? The whole world buried him like a homeless bum? Where? I'm asking you. In Turkey, warming your back, I bet. Well, that's where you were if you ever come back here again. And if you don't get your red iron in 3 seconds and disappear over the horizon, I'm gonna pull half your hair and scratch your powdered face. And now I count 1, and Carla moved so menacingly on Violetta that she backed away and shouted, "You're all crazy!" and slipped into the car and was gone. "Don't be afraid, Marusia. She won't come here again," assured the dazed woman. A satisfied Carla.
Gradually, Marina settled down in the house, put it in order, even fixed for the winter the old stove. Grandpa Nicandro did his best, did everything to the best of his ability, and refused money categorically. Marina, who grew up without care and affection in her own family, even tears of gratitude came to her eyes. She never expected such responsiveness from complete strangers.
And soon came the solution to her main problem. One gloomy fall day, a black SUV pulled up in front of a makeshift bazaar on the highway. A trim man in a brightly colored sports jacket bought a huge bag of red apples from Grandma Dolores. He walked over to a small table with milk. Marina had already sold out, and the only things left on the table were cottage cheese, butter, and homemade cheeses. After tasting a piece of brinza, the man whistled, winked at Marina, and said, "I take wholesale everything. How much from me?" "Yes, you do not eat so much. It will be lost," laughed Marina. "Only money wasted." "And who told you that it's all I'll eat myself?" surprised cheerful buyer. "In my office, a lot of hungry people from your cheeses will not remain a trace. I, frankly speaking, already tired of watching them choking on pizza and rolls. Let them get used to eating healthy. Oh, and you should get home. You're freezing. By the way, what brings you here? You don't look like a country girl."
The stranger looked so compassionate and his smile was so open that Marina, instantly losing her secrecy, told as a matter of fact all the unhappy history of her journey from the city to the countryside. Well, life has bruised you," scratching the tip of his nose, said the man when Marina was silent. "You know what? Come on, gather your belongings and let's go."
"Where?" Marina stared at him perplexed.
Where? On Kurikina Gora. I have a daughter now without a nanny. The old one quit, a new one has not found yet. And without a helper, I cannot go anywhere. I'm a widower, and the child must look after. I'll give you a place to live and a job. 2 in 1. I cannot, desperately shook her head. Marina, I cannot. Why is that? The stranger was wary. I cannot. Young lady, you are calm, educated, unspoiled. I've seen people. I notice. I'm going to have a child with Pablo soon, Marina confessed. Now, but half a term has already passed. Well, in another half a term of winter, we'll think of something, categorically stated the man and finally introduced himself, Yaroslav, or just Slava. Get in the car. Time is of the essence. With these words, he picked up a cart with empty milk cans and almost forcefully pushed Marina into his car. A large country house met the guest ambiguously. A blonde 5-year-old creature named Sophia was indescribably delighted at the sight of her new nanny, smelling of milk and smoke from the stove. But Albina, a spectacular brunette, who turned out to be Yaroslav's fiancée, snorted unhappily. "And why did you bring that rustic, ungroomed hillbilly? Don't you have enough vacant governesses in agencies?" "You see, dear, they have too many conditions and demands, and since you and Sophia don't get along with Sophia, the issue had to be solved urgently." Yaroslav didn't go into details, and he himself dragged Marina's suitcase into the guest room. With Sophia, relations were formed immediately. Open and direct girl, badly in need of simple and warm communication, took to Marina instantly. They built together from the construction kit fabulous cities, populated them with small toy inhabitants, inventing each its own story, molded from plasticine, funny and kind animals, arranged dolls' doll balls, dressing them up in lavish dresses, and reading fairy tales in the evening. Marina, who had not played enough in her absurd childhood, greedily made up for lost time and gave herself up to fantasies no less than her little pupil. Albina, however, she tried to avoid, seeing how her presence in the house irritated the spoiled beauty. For some reason, Marina felt that she would try to get rid of her, and her premonitions were not wrong.
On one of the fine days, gladdened by the last scanty rays of sunshine, Marina and Sophia walked in the courtyard of the mansion. They had already ridden their bicycles and made sand dolls, but did not want to go home. And Marina began to weave a wreath of fallen maple leaves. Sophia ran under the trees and collected leaves for the wreath. The new nanny was so engrossed in weaving that she did not notice how Albina came up to the girl and whispered something in her ear, pointing to the gate that had opened. Sophia laughed, nodded her head merrily, and, sitting down on her bicycle, quickly rode to the gate and passed it, and rode out into the street. The gate slowly closed behind her, cutting the girl off from her nanny. Marina continued to weave the wreath until she discovered she had run out of leaves. She looked around for her assistant and was horrified to discover that Sophia was nowhere to be found. The blood rushed to her head, and before her eyes flashed pictures, one more terrible than the other. Not remembering herself from horror, she scurried around the huge plot and some inner instinct, or maybe Sophia's guardian angel made her run out into the street. Standing at the corner was Sophia and looked around in confusion. "Sophia, come here quickly, my girl. There's a road. You can't go there." Marina shouted with all her might and rushed to the girl with all her might. When she got there, she grabbed her in her arms and pressed her against herself. "Sophia, my girl, well, how did you leave? Why? Anything could have happened," Marina repeated, swallowing the flowing tears. "I went to meet my daddy, and for some reason he wasn't outside," Sophia said, frustrated. "Daddy? What makes you think Daddy will be here?" "Albina told me that Daddy was coming back and would be happy if I met him. So I drove out, and for some reason, he wasn't here." Marina got a chill inside. It was the first of an undeclared war, and she'd lost it. How many more battles are there to fight? And who will come out of them victorious? And it wasn't just Marina. It was Albina, as it had just turned out. It had just become clear that Albina would not hesitate to stake her child's life and safety, and that was much more than just losing the shelter over her head. There was no choice. She had to take the challenge and fight for as long as she could stay in this house if she wasn't thrown out tonight. Marina returned to the house surprisingly calm and collected. She changed Sophia and went down with her to supper, inwardly preparing herself for unpleasant events. The girl, when she saw her father, ran to hug him and chirped, "Daddy, here you are, and why were you before when I met you?" "Met you? And when did you meet me, daughter?" Yaroslav leaned toward his daughter in surprise. Then, when the new nanny was so fond of weaving wreaths that she let the child drive through the open gate into the street where the daredevils race day and night, Albina said coldly. Yaroslav slowly straightened up and stared intently at Marina. She inwardly turned cold, seeing how much hard to restrain rage was in this burning her through the eyes and numbed, losing all the necessary and correct words. The situation was saved by Sophia. "You're nasty! You're evil!" she said instantly, having understood the heat of adult passions. The girl burst out and almost with fists attacked Albina. "You told me yourself that Daddy is on the street, and now Daddy is angry at Marina." Yaroslav slowly shifted his gaze to Albina. She too must have felt uncomfortable and snorted unhappily. The servants should be checked for professional suitability. She hurried upstairs to her room. There was a long pause. "I think I'll have dinner at my place," Yaroslav said with an effort, and Marina realized what a storm of passions this strong and imperturbable man was fighting with. "We too," quietly answered Marina, and, taking Sophia's hand, went up to the nursery. She slept badly at night. Bad premonitions tormented her soul like piranha fish. Something subtly suggested that this was no mere domestic quarrel, that Albina, having failed to win the first round, would soon take more drastic steps, and there was no telling how for everyone. There was something ruthless and merciless about this beautiful woman, like a panther preparing to leap. Marina decided to observe her more closely, even if it meant curtailing her games with Sophia. Things were beginning to take a bad turn and had to be on the lookout. For the next few days, Marina tried to keep Albina in her sights as much as possible, but nothing worthy of attention was happening. Either the abuser took a break or she'd become more cautious. She was nice to Yaroslav, standardly affectionate with Sophia, and the new nanny simply did not notice. Marina was torn between her suspicions and more often came to mind thoughts that they were unfounded or unprovable. But then, after almost 3 weeks, managed to hear a fragment of a telephone conversation when she, collecting toys scattered between tubs of lush tropical plants, became invisible to everyone passing through the living room. Serge, don't get on my nerves. They're already on edge. I could barely get you to set a specific wedding date. I can't talk now. Call me at 2 o'clock. I'll be free. Is she cheating on him? The most logical thought in such a situation. And why not? She does not love Yaroslav. It was evident to the naked eye. She just pulls money out of him. To eavesdrop, of course, is very bad. But to deceive Yaroslav, it's even worse. With these thoughts, Marina began to think how she could become an invisible witness of this conversation. The appointed time was almost the same as Sophia's afternoon nap. I wish she had not been away. There may never be another chance like this, pounded in her temples in time with her beating heart. Fortunately, Albina did not go away, but went quietly to the far corner of the garden, knowing that the gardener had taken his vacation, having finished all the seasonal work in the garden. Marina crept after her at a respectable distance, annoyed that the bare and transparent garden made it impossible to get within hearing distance. But Albina was let down by her over-concealment. In an effort to conceal herself from prying eyes, she had selected a bench hidden between the evergreen juniper bushes, and this juniper, which really concealed, allowed Marina to approach quietly from the back and turn on the recorder. Serge, I don't understand you. Where do you put your money? Ah, in the casino, and as always on the red did not go. Well, you are a bastard. You think I'm going to be stuck here between a girl and a babysitter, playing the love-struck fool? Nanny's not stupid. She's watching me like a wolf. And I've got first to organize everything in the best possible way. You know he'll wipe out anyone, and he won't blink an eye if he doesn't get his way. All right, don't whine. I'll give you 1 diamond ring. That should be enough to cover your expenses. I'm going to a spa tomorrow, you know where, and I'm taking the ring with me. And by the way, that's the last time. You know that. Okay, that's it. Enough chit-chat. I'm freezing to death on this bench. I'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock sharp. Kisses. With these words, Albina ended the call and, shivering from the first frost, hurried away into the cozy warmth of the house. Marina lay pressed against the ground, not feeling the cold, and in her head was spinning stupid phrase, "Where did I get to, and where are my things?" Finally, feeling the icy embrace of the frozen ground, Marina got up and, without a second's hesitation, sent a recording of the conversation to Yaroslav. In the evening, trying to quickly put Sophia to bed, Marina slipped into her room and firmly locked the door. Soon Yaroslav was to return, and the consequences of her action could be very different. Soon the front door really slammed, and quick male footsteps went into Albina's room. The conversation, quiet at first, quickly turned into a scandal, and Marina shuddered every now and then. Even through the 2 doors, Marina could hear Yaroslav's fierce roar and his fiancée's almost shrill screams. Poorly perceiving what was going on, she nevertheless realized that Fierce was the nickname of one of Yaroslav's chief rivals, Antonio Fiersov, who intended to use Albina's help to get dirt on his firm and had not hesitated even in this disreputable way to achieve his goal. The increasing noise awoke little Sophia, and she came running to her nurse in fright to her nurse. The child, seemingly ignorant of adult intercourse, quickly grasped the essence of the moment and asked the question, "Marina, is it Daddy driving the wicked Albina out of the house?" "I hope so," Marina answered, and clasped Sophia to herself and began to stroke her white girl with her trembling fingers. Soon, fleeing footsteps were heard on the stairs, accompanied by Albina's voice cursing the house and all who lived in it, and then loudly slammed the front door, and there was such a ringing silence that Marina was even dizzy from the tension that had begun to wear off. It would seem that all the most unpleasant things were behind her, but apparently the stress of the last few days had taken its toll, and the nanny suddenly felt a strong contraction-like pain in her lower abdomen. "God, it's so early. There's still almost 2 months to go," she whispered and started to leave the room, but opening the door, she collapsed and passed out. The last thing she heard before she sank into the darkness was Sophia's frightened cry. "Papa! Papa, save Marina, quickly!" The darkness dissipated as suddenly as it came, and Marina found herself lying in the hospital room with an unusually flat stomach. "Where am I? What about the baby?" She anxiously tried to get up. "Lie down, sweetheart." The midwife gently held her down. "You're all right. He's a 7-month-old boy. but he's a healthy baby. They're nursing these days. You're fine too. The bleeding stopped. Your relative gave blood. You're lucky to have him. He's a rare type." "What relative?" stunned Marina. "I have only my sister." "How what?" "The one who brought you here. And you didn't know, did you? Well, now you'll know. The blood test showed you're related." The room again swirled in Marina's eyes. How many more surprises has fate prepared her? But she didn't have the energy to think about it, was not yet, and she sank into a salutary light slumber, from which Yaroslav's loud phone call snapped her out of it. "Well, sis, how are you doing? I was told that you're back to normal. What will you call your nephew?" You, wait, how could such a thing have happened?" babbled confused Marina. "Elementary, Watson." Yaroslav's voice also gave out the experienced tension. "I'm an orphanage, but I always knew that my little sister was adopted by someone. We, as you know, not all laws are written in our country, but I couldn't find her. You know, adoption secrecy. But when I donated blood for you, the rare type and phenotype matched, and then the test proved we were related. Your mom didn't hold back either. She admitted right off the bat that you were adopted, and then Violetta was born. By the way, she's fine, though spoiled." Marina was silent, swallowing the tears of joy from the acquisition of a soulmate, bitterness from understanding the reasons for their always with Violetta inequality, and a whole host of feelings, which she would not now be able to describe or define. "Why don't you say something? Are we going to name the boy? Are we going to give him a name or what?" Yaroslav tried to fill the awkward pause. "We will," smiled through tears Marina. "Pablo named in honor of his father, and that's it." The return of Marina and little Pablo from the hospital celebrated warmly and joyfully. To Marina, Sophia and Yaroslav were joined by his orphanage named brother Miguel, and despite all the previous offenses, Marina decided to name him after all. Offenses Marina decided to still call Violetta, no matter how hard, and they still grew up sisters. Violetta, not expecting forgiveness and reconciliation, felt awkward at the table, and Marina every now and then caught on her self-interested looks Miguel. When the first toast sounded and Marina went away to feed her son, the door of her room knocked gently. On the threshold stood Violetta, confused, sad, with tears in her eyes. "What are you doing?" Marina huffed. "Something happened?" "Happened." Violetta tried to speak quietly, so as not to scare the baby. "Boomerang to me for you flew." "What boomerang?" Marina did not understand. "Ordinary." Violetta sniffed her nose. "I did not forbid Diego to evict you for debts. Not forbidden. He, of course, did not really listen to me, but my guilt does not reduce it. And now the house is gone for his debts because Diego was swallowed up by the sweepstakes. I tried to treat him, but I couldn't. He's going crazy from horse racing. He closed his financial failure once and got hooked. Now he's lost his house and his car and all his savings. I've been able to defer some of the debt, but my mom's in a bad way, and when she dies, I'll have to pay off the one bedroom. Will you let me stay at my grandfather's house? You see, I laughed at you on the highway, and now I'm asking you to go there myself." And Violetta was flooded with bitter, inconsolable tears. "Stop it, Violetta, don't cry." Marina tried to soothe her sister. "There's no reason for you to go to the village. I'll talk to Yaroslav. I think he likes you. He will not refuse to live. But of course, without Diego." "I've kicked out that bloody ludomaniac," Violetta sobbed more quietly. "But what's the use? He's done as much as he could. So let it all go. Now you have a new life beginning." Marina hugged Violetta. "Come on, Pablo fell asleep, and men probably already waited." "Have you really forgiven me, Marinka?" Raised wet eyes Violetta. "How can such a thing be forgiven?" "You can," Marina smiled affectionately. "Everything is possible if you want." The sisters went down to the dining room and met the gazes of men staring at them. Marina, a slightly embarrassed look of Miguel, and Violetta, interested and staring Yaroslav's. 6 months later, the two weddings, as the sisters had wished, took place on the same day. As the months passed, life began to settle into a joyful routine for Marina and her newfound family. The bond between the sisters strengthened, their past differences fading like distant memories. Violetta, determined to make amends for her past mistakes, threw herself into helping Marina with baby Pablo. The once proud and aloof sister now became a pillar of support, her genuine care and warmth enveloping the household. Yaroslav and Miguel, too, found their places within this growing family. Yaroslav's gentle demeanor and unwavering support made him a rock for Marina, who often found solace in his presence. Sophia, who had grown deeply attached to Marina, now saw her as a second mother. The little girl's laughter filled the house, her innocence and joy spreading like sunshine on a cold winter day. Miguel, who had initially kept to himself, slowly opened up. He admired Violetta's resilience and dedication, and their shared history as orphans created a unique bond between them. His gentle kindness and understanding nature drew Violetta out of her shell, and soon a budding romance blossomed between them. The house, once filled with the weight of unspoken grief and tension, now echoed with laughter and the promise of new beginnings.
One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Yaroslav stood up, raising his glass. "To family," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "To the family we choose, the family we find, and the family we build together. Life has brought us through many storms, but it's also given us the strength to face them. Here's to the love that binds us and the future we will share."
Everyone raised their glasses, the clinking sound resonating with hope and gratitude. As they ate, stories were shared, and plans for the future were discussed. Marina felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. Her heart swelled with happiness as she looked around the table at the faces of those she loved.
Weeks turned into months, and soon it was time for the two weddings. The preparations were a joyous whirlwind, with everyone pitching in. Marina and Violetta, once divided by jealousy and misunderstanding, now found themselves united in a bond stronger than ever. They spent countless hours together, planning every detail, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood.
The day of the weddings dawned bright and clear. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden, filled with blooming flowers and the sweet scent of spring. Marina, holding little Pablo in her arms, walked down the aisle with Yaroslav by her side. Violetta, radiant and glowing, walked beside Miguel. The vows exchanged were heartfelt and sincere, each word a testament to their journey and their commitment to the future. As the celebrations continued into the night, the garden was filled with music and laughter. Sophia danced with Marina, her little feet barely touching the ground as they twirled. Yaroslav watched them with a smile, his heart full. Violetta and Miguel, lost in their own world, swayed to the music, their eyes reflecting the love they had found in each other. Under the starlit sky, Marina took a moment to herself, reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her here. The pain and struggles of the past seemed distant now, overshadowed by the love and happiness that filled her life. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that Pablo would grow up surrounded by family and love. Yaroslav found her standing alone and wrapped his arms around her. "Thinking about the future?" he asked softly. "Yes," Marina replied, leaning into his embrace. "And for the first time, I'm not afraid of what it holds. With all of you by my side, I know we can face anything." He kissed her forehead, their future bright and promising. The night was filled with dreams and hopes, and as Marina looked at her family, she knew that they were bound by a love that would endure any storm. And so, under the canopy of stars, surrounded by the laughter of their loved ones, Marina, Violetta, Yaroslav, and Miguel began the next chapter of their lives. It was a chapter filled with promise, love, and the unshakable belief that, together, they could create a future brighter than any they had ever imagined.